you very much for joining the discussion today. We have a very special discussion planned. Namely, it's a joint initiative, both by ETIN, Innovation Circle Series, but also by the Food Systems Talks, which is also organized by the UN-based issue-based coalition on sustainable food systems. So we're very delighted to have our director, Elisabeth Türk, moderating this discussion, and also extremely delighted and honored to have you, David Nabarro, as our guest speaker today. This is an interesting topic, especially given the ongoing events now happening in Geneva. So for one, we had the Regional Forum for Sustainable Development happening this week, but also the regional preparatory meeting for Europe and Central Asia, the UNECE +4, right? So we're very delighted to organize this discussion on this occasion. I would invite you throughout the discussion, those online, please feel free to add any questions you may have in the chat, and then we can get to them at a later stage. And without further ado, I will hand over to Elisabeth. Please go ahead.
Many thanks, Emanuela, and it's a great pleasure for me to be again in an ETIN live podcast. I really enjoy that. And, in Geneva, we have really a totally sunny Friday afternoon. It has some 18, 20 degrees. So huge thanks to all of the team and our special guests for being here with us today. And I guess it's a little bit my fault that this is happening, because as I happen to engage with the ETIN team, where we talk a lot about transformative innovation, and as I engage a lot with our agriculture team, where we talk a lot about sustainable food systems, at some point I thought, wow, we need to bring the two together. Because in the agriculture team, and particularly here at the preparatory meeting for the Food Systems Summit and the stock taking happening in Addis later this year, we could really hear about the complexity of food systems transformation. And that involves so many different aspects of the SDGs and so many different economic, social, environmental aspects. So maybe bringing the transformative innovation idea to this is helpful in one way or the other. And that's also why we are very, very happy to be partnering in that podcast, specifically with the UN Issue-Based Coalition for Sustainable Food Systems, so the IBC, as we call it. It's really sort of like a group of, I guess, around 10 UN agencies that work together or try to work together, and focusing on the UNECE region, which is sort of Central Asia, but also Southern Caucasus, Eastern Europe, Western Balkan. And the beauty here is that the different agencies all bring their different perspectives. And I'm very happy that we as UNECE can be part of that. And this group also does the so-called Food Systems Talks, and that's why we're having the joint podcast here today. Now, we have a special guest invited here with us today, and David Nabarro is based in Geneva, but it's not every day that you come to visit us here in the Palais des Nations, so super happy to have you. David Nabarro, you are the Strategic Director at 4SD Foundation. So I guess the 4 S's, the skills, the systems, the synergies for sustainable development. So it's already a great name. And you're also the co-director of the Institute of Global Health Innovation at the Imperial College in London. But before that, you had so many different roles at the UN system. Yeah. And I guess you also know how to transform the UN system, or to shape the UN system. You served as the UN Special Representative on Food Security and Nutrition. Yeah. And you were also the coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition, the so-called SUN movement. Yeah. And you were special advisor on sustainable development and climate change. So they come together already, like the nutrition aspect, the climate change aspect, the transformational role. So huge thanks for being with us, David. And, maybe my first question to you is, can you talk a little bit about the complexity of this food system transformation and all the issues that come together here?
Thanks very much indeed, Elisabeth. And greetings to everybody. Just a couple of seconds, perhaps, on why we called our organization 4SD, Skills, Systems and Synergies for Sustainable Development. It all happened when I was working in the UN with the Secretary General around the time that the Sustainable Development Agenda was being negotiated. And one of the things that was given to me working in the office of Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General in 2016, was the following. David, what are the different ways of thinking and working that we need to do in the United Nations system with this sustainable development agenda coming through. And it was at that point that I realized that we actually do need new skills. We do need to think in terms of systems, and we need to focus all the time on synergy, because quite often when you're doing systems work, you get very stuck on the trade-offs, which can lead to a lot of difficult politics and indeed accentuate some of the differences that exist. But if you can reframe issues so that you can be looking for synergy, it makes a huge difference. So that became the name of our organization that was made into a foundation a couple of years ago. Now, we've started talking about food systems in the United Nations really since 2019, when Antonio Guterres said, yeah, I'd like to have a summit on food systems, and I'll do it in September 2021. But he said to us, do we actually think of food as a systems issue in the UN? Or is it an issue that we tend to divide up into different pieces between different entities? It's a bit like how governments divide things up, because he was talking very much from his time as Prime Minister of Portugal. And I must say that I had to say back to Mr. Guterres that actually I don't think we do. And I don't think actually that food systems exist as systems inside many countries. There are sectoral perspectives on food production and food consumption, food waste, and so on. But those sectoral perspectives haven't yet gelled into a way of thinking in systems, or that's what a situation was in 2019. And so part of what's been happening in the last few years is the focus on shaping food systems where there weren't really functioning systems beforehand. So what was our experience with that shaping process? As I look back to my time in the UN and leaving and starting my own organization, what did I see? Firstly, we have to recognize that agriculture and food fulfill multiple purposes in society. There's a big focus on production, on making sure that there's enough food to go around for everybody, and the right kind of food too. There's a big focus on nutrition, whether that food is actually leading to better nourishment, or is it somehow contributing to non-communicable diseases and sickness. There's a focus a lot on climate and nature because of the destructive effort of farming practices on nature and their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but also the fact that farmers are affected first and worst by climate change in just about every community. So adaptation and mitigation are super important here. And then a focus on women, because historically, women have always been the people who do most of the work inside food systems. I bet you there's somebody around this table who's perhaps been in a farming household and has seen how the women in farming households are often treated as, frankly, low cost but vital labor. And then what about young people? All over the world, farming is being done by people who are older and older. Where are the young people who are going to come in? So when we started looking at this with the Secretary General, we sort of said to ourselves, oh, goodness, this is a really complex set of systems that are shaped according to lots of different environmental and social and economic and political realities. And they don't respond well to being prodded and poked with vertical interventions, even though that's what governments tend to do. They need to be treated as whole systems issues, messy whole systems issues, to be shaped so that they fulfill these multiple objectives, but recognizing that there are going to be disagreements time after time after time about how this should be done. So our challenge as systems innovators is to find ways to acknowledge the contentious realities, to understand that the whole of food systems is messy, and then to help governments, other stakeholders, including parliamentarians, young people, particularly the women that I've mentioned, and then those who are commonly often lacking the agency to access the food they need and are at risk of starvation or of eating the wrong stuff in too large quantities, and to try to bring them all on board. And that's why I'm so pleased to be here today, because innovation for transformation is not just about gadgets and gizmos. It's about creating a space where people with very different perspectives can be enabled to interact with each other, even if they don't like each other. And that for me is very important, but still to work on issues and work on issues on a constant basis.
Wow, David, that was a super introduction, and I'm really happy that we brought you to the 18 community, and I can see now a lot of things we could explore in the future. But basically, you've reminded us, and I'm opening a bubble here for later, about the systemic transformation the UN needs. Yeah, and now we are doing UN 80. Yeah, and there are lots of things coming, so I'm going to pick your brain about this, but outside of this podcast.
Risky stuff.
Risky stuff, very risky stuff at a very difficult point in time. No? But here we come back to the food systems. And so you nicely already referred to how complex the food systems are. There is the health aspect, there is the environmental climate change aspect, there is biodiversity we had in the meeting before. Now there is the gender aspect, the use aspect, then there are all the economic aspects, trade-related, financing, innovation. So it's really sort of like stuff that cannot be treated in sectors and silos. Yeah? And I guess we need to bring the actors, and you also referred to the different actors. So the parliaments, the policymakers, the youth, the women, the international organization, private sector. We need to bring them together to figure out that new messy solution. And that reminds me a little bit of the complexities we are trying to address in ETI. How do we deal with these totally new questions that transcend boundaries, where we need to bring actors together, where maybe we have an idea where we want to go towards sustainability, but maybe that directionality of sustainability in itself is a trade-off, environment versus jobs, environment versus health. Yeah. And maybe we don't have the solution. So we need to kind of like do learning and figure out what works, but also be okay if something doesn't work and learn from the lesson. No? So these are all 18 topics. But before we dive into this, David, one question, because you have such a strong nutrition background. We don't typically look so much at nutrition here in UNECE, but can you say a few words about nutrition and the food systems transformation?
Thank you. In around 2019, there was a study done on the costs of food systems in today's world. Now, these kinds of studies are always risky, but here was the result. Just the hidden costs of food systems can be estimated at around $12 trillion a year. But the actual benefits of food systems monetized don't come to that amount. They come to around $10 trillion a year. So there's already a kind of deficit that food causes damage. Now, if you look at these hidden costs, what are they? Some of them are due to environmental impact of agriculture and food systems. Some are to do with the human impact of agriculture and food systems, particularly some of the impoverishment that's coming because of the way in which they're structured. But around 50% of the hidden costs are to do with the nutritional aspects of food systems. Food systems that don't provide sufficient nutrition for people to eat. You could say, well, they're often a bit stressed, but that happens in war situations. It happens when governance is poor. And it happens also when people are shocked by things like accelerating climate change, which bad storms like we had recently in Mozambique. So there are these definite environmental, nature and climate costs. but the nutrition costs are by far and away the biggest. Undernutrition and overnutrition. I just want to say that the costs due to people eating too much of the wrong stuff are the ones that really worry public health people. Elisabeth, I think you know that I started out in life as a public health doctor, and my first international position was with the World Health Organization. So I'm very alert to anybody telling me that the non-communicable diseases as a result of food systems are on the rise everywhere, and are alarming, particularly to finance ministries all over the world. You travel to hospitals in Latin America, and you find that many of the adult wards are full of people with conditions like type 2 diabetes, and that diabetes is associated with kidney failure or with people having to have limbs amputated, and you've got hospitals full of people who are waiting for expensive treatment that they can't afford. Or you look at the FAO's recent analyses of the state of food and nutrition in the world, and you find that 700 million people are really poorly nourished, and that possibly over 2 billion people are just not able to access and afford a nutritious diet. We're essentially seeing food systems that are just not delivering the nutrition that people need. Of course, there will be many, and we've heard it last week in Paris at the Nutrition for Growth Summit. There'll be many who say that undernutrition is a political failure. It's not a shortage of supply. But I want to stress that stuff is never quite that simple. And if you take a systems approach, it may be a combination of localized supply shortages due to climate issues, plus political failure, plus often conflict. And we know from experience right now that there are people turning off and turning on availability of food for people as part of the process of conflict management. So we have got a massive problem with undernutrition, but we've also got this massive problem with excess consumption. And for me, this is the heart of food systems transformation, is to put nutrition at the center.
Wow, David, I'm having here our our sweet, like the Easter egg, and then I have a sort of like a sweet I got from Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, with some dried fruit.
But if I measured your body mass index, you are such a model. Well, you can afford it. That's our point about the kind of approach to nutrition we need. We do need to recognize that for cultural and taste reasons, people need to eat all sorts of different stuff. So we're not trying to say force you into not eating meat, or force you into not eating sugar, or force you into eating more salt or iodine or whatever. What we're trying to do instead in food systems work is to create the conditions within which people can enjoy good nutrition, if it is in their wherewithal to do so.
So creating the conditions, but let me push a little bit on our role as consumers, because we still have to say, we go to the supermarket, we make a choice on the menu. Is there does the sustainable food systems transformation movement or organizations, they do try to empower consumers to make the right choice? Now I'm thinking here, the aspect of behavioral change that we discuss in transformative innovation. So if we really want to change systems, we all, as consumers, as cooks, need to change in one way or the other. So is there anything, maybe it's about the balance in terms of behavioral change, not too much prescriptive, but empowering. So do you have any points on that?
Can I ask you just to allow me to talk a little bit about what has happened since the 2021 Food Systems Summit? When Secretary General called everybody together in 2021, it was one of these conferences that's organized by the Secretary General, not by the member states. So he took a huge responsibility in doing so. And I have to stress, it was right in the middle of COVID. It had to be done virtually. It was a tricky thing to do. He appointed somebody called Agnes Kalibata, Rwandan, to be his special envoy for that summit. Agnes Kalibata said, we need to give space to people coming from countries to talk about their experience. And then we need to find a way to let that experience come up and be shared. And so Agnes asked that a process of dialogues be set up all over the world so that people could talk about what they wanted to do on food systems. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General, at the end of 2020, wrote to all the permanent representatives, said, would you like to nominate somebody to be the convener of food systems dialogues in your country? There were 149 nominated conveners. These conveners got together and basically organized dialogues, as far as we can tell, involving at least 110,000 people all over the world to look at the kind of food systems they want for the future. And they, in fact, were encouraged to develop pathways that they then posted publicly as a result of those dialogues. If we look at those pathways, we find that there is a very high level of interest, expressed in at least 50 of them, for work to try to make sure that there is greater public engagement in the whole area of food and nutrition and personal lifestyle. The pressure from people was to say, give us the space to be able to talk about this and not just to be influenced by the latest marketing gizmo of a heavy sugar selling company, or not just the latest pressure from a noisy advocacy organization telling us that we must completely change everything, otherwise we're doomed. And so what we learned through the dialogue process around the summit that's been in place since, and you've actually just been at a meeting reflecting some of this ongoing work, is that it's a continuous discussion going on in every country, in every community about eating and food. And the more that discussion can be facilitated in schools, in workplaces, in sports groups, in religious organizations, in community-based structures, particularly bringing in older people or mothers with very young children or people who are on low incomes, the more that discussion can continue, the more it can be done in spaces where people have got the chance to express what's on their minds, the more likely we are to see the kind of thing that you've just talked about starting to emerge. It's people seeing that there is great value in focusing on their diet and their children's diets for their well-being and also their futures.
Super. So basically, the meeting we had right now, which particularly yesterday was a quite formalistic meeting, when reading out
today.
Exactly, country statements. The behavioral change and the transformation is really, how to say, in all of this, because those experts who read out their country statement, I guess they had to have lots of consultations domestically across different sectors of the government, maybe with industry, maybe with different parts of the community, to come up with their way of food systems or their contribution to the discussion here in Geneva. And that actually is a beautiful thing and a beautiful role for the UN to play. Yeah. And if we then bring the actors together to allow them to experiment a little bit more, that would maybe be sort of like a second additional step. Super. So let's try to maybe disentangle a little bit more. We've talked about the behavioral change and the complexity of the whole thing. David, you several times mentioned that transforming the food systems is more than just the new gadget on the iPhone, or I guess it's more than the newest nutrient supplement that I can eat if I do an extra dose of sport. So
we'd like it to be like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's more than technological innovation. And I think that's also a central feature of 18, that we say there are these technological innovations, but to really create transformative change, it's not enough to have this technological gadget. Yeah. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit how this plays out in food systems.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to say, Elisabeth, you came along today and you participated exactly as I believe a senior in the United Nations system should. You're not there to say how great your organization is or your division is. You're not here to do self-promotion. You did none of that there. Instead, you functioned as a true facilitator. You encourage people to feel comfortable about being able to speak, not just about what's in their prepared statements, but what it really has been like to navigate through some of the really tricky issues that crop up when working on food. I mean, supposing you're trying to get better conditions for young people who go to school so that they're not constantly bombarded by people selling lollipops or chocolate bars or other such things outside the school gate. Just have to have a dialogue with the people responsible for the schools, with the parents, with the children themselves who've got to be part of the work, and also with the authorities, local authorities, national authorities, and with the businesses, because the businesses are part of it. You can't just treat them as though they're outside and you shut the door and then you unlock it when you've told them what you want them to do. They need to be part of the process. And so it's that capacity that you have and that others in the UN system are beginning to show, which is one of facilitating the process of curious discovery and exploration, and indeed experimentation and occasionally failing, that is needed to advance on things like diet linked to food systems. That's how Mexico was helped by the UN system to advance towards an agreement that's just been reached, that's involved the president, to radically shift the way in which food is approached in schools. Not just giving kids nice food to eat, but using the feeding as a way of basing education on what happens in the farms, what happens in retail, what happens to wasted food, and all that kind of stuff. So UN as facilitator, UN as stimulator, UN as, in my view, empowerer of others to do cool stuff is where the UN belongs. Last point, it means letting go. How often do we find that our colleagues don't really like letting go? They like to control. But that's honestly the thing that we've got to avoid. I know we've got some terrible examples around in world leaders at the moment who are into high-level control, but that's not how we should behave. And even if there are people who are telling us that that's what we should do, we have to learn to let go. You know, there's a lovely book. I'll just give you the title. It's called Love is Letting Go of Fear. And I do think that part of this is about having an approach to our work that is based on unconditional love and respect for people and not being frightened that they'll go astray if you don't control them tightly. You're an example.
Well, and thank you, David. Thank you for the compliments. But now you were really inspiring because, you know, we are just doing our program of work in light of this crisis situation that the UN is in. And when you said UN as a facilitator and as a stimulator, I think I really, that inspires me now for the program of work we have to do. But bringing it a little bit also to the 18 conversation here. What I heard from you is, we need to let go of control. Yeah. We need to experiment. And I think that's, again, totally 18 topic. We need to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And it's perfectly fine every now to have something that doesn't work, because that's how you learn. And so I'm wondering this, I think in 18 we call it strategic learning or double loop learning. These aspects, they really matter for the UN and for these big transformations. And I'm wondering whether we have some 18 colleagues around who maybe afterwards also can say a few words about this, because I think this is really a key aspect. Now, Emanuela, you tell me if somebody immediately wants to speak. Now, if not, I would now shift a little bit and say, David, you've picked up on the private sector in many occasions already, yeah? So if we think about the private sector a little bit as also an avenue for transformational paths, if we think about these young entrepreneurs who maybe have a technological idea or have a idea for a business case, what can we do to harness their power in the food systems transformation? Is that an entry point?
First of all, everyone has a role, but younger people need to be given a special space and need to be welcomed. And when I was younger, I benefited enormously from being mentored and given opportunities by people much older than me. And I feel that it's all of our responsibility to do it. It doesn't mean that you just open your door and say, we've messed up, us older people, you young people come in and sort us out. That's kind of just not paying attention to our responsibilities. So yes, entrepreneurs, of course, but there are other young people who are not yet ready to be entrepreneurs, but they've got great ideas. And sometimes they need space to come in as well. Don't just select the people who put their hands up first in the class. Basically, we need space for every young person to be able to be engaged. I was just in UNESCO last week, actually, and I was hearing a lot about their approach to lifelong learning. And one of the things that I think that in the UN we could do a lot of is to recognize that lifelong learning is for everybody. Lifelong learning needs to be universal. And therefore, every one of us needs to be committed to encouraging lifelong learning. Just one last thing. We have to be very careful about our language. How do we define challenges in the area of food and nutrition? Well, the answer is recognize that they are multifactorial and that therefore we are probably not, in the traditional sense that we tend to say it, we're probably not going to be able to solve them. The concept of solution very much links us back to our earlier lives when we were learning about needing to prove things and needing to solve challenges using arithmetic or using algebra or whatever. But complex systems issues can be looked at, can be re-examined, can be addressed differently by bringing in alternative perspectives, but may never be solvable. And by extension, the way in which we move forward when we're working on messy, complex systems is not necessarily by aligning people around a particular discipline or a particular belief system, but by creating quite loose arrangements, movements where there are spaces for exchange, perhaps a bit of structuring, but all the time some clarity on where we're trying to head. And then we end up by saying collectively, we move ahead one step at a time, sometimes going backwards with the direction in mind, engaging everyone as much as we possibly can. I wanted to say that. I'm sorry I had to go on.
I think here you touched on another important point that we discuss in transformative innovation, the coordination and governance.
Yes.
We need to create that loose space where different actors come together in a messy environment and where they learn going out of what they think the clear solution that is kind of like coming from our past dependency is. Yeah. So basically be totally open in terms of the type of solution we are looking for. So if I think about ETIN, we have touched on several things now. We have touched on transformative learning and directionality. Notice like environmental, health, social issues that relate to the food systems transformation. We have touched on experimentation and learning, that things might maybe need to go wrong in order to get to the right objective.
Absolutely.
And we have touched on the issue of coordination and governance, that we need to create a space where the different actors come together and find new solutions that are maybe totally new. So this is already really a lot of 18 points I see here. Maybe for a concrete aspect, David, do you have any innovative example from the UNECE region that worked, where one can think about scaling it up, some sort of like best practice or showcase scenario? You had Mexico, but do we have?
Well, I want to give a big shout out to the people of Norway. Just a country that's got all sorts of challenges in their farming system. A lot of the smallholders are quite nervous about their economic future. They're being encouraged to shift away from producing reindeer meat, which is a very important part of the Norwegian diet. And they're nervous about the future. Some of them are actually part of a central political party that is very much taking a position that's challenging the current prime minister. And they're not quite sure where they're going to go on the future of their food systems. They thought we could do this in two ways. We could create an interministerial group where ministers come together and try to navigate how we deal with some of the ongoing controversies and challenges. Or we try to take it outside government and we get a respected group of scientists who are not seen to be linked to any political party. And they've gone for the second approach because they recognize that right now in Norway, the politics are just too tight for them to be able to find a pathway forward. And so I would say I would commend the Norway approach. But then Denmark and Finland have gone for more of a coordination amongst ministries and ministers and setting up interministerial coordination mechanisms, linking them to public and private partnerships. So that's one. Second is that there are many countries in your region, both in the eastern part of your region and in the western part, who've decided we must involve people better in food systems transformation. And one area they can do it is by starting discussions about diet. But they can quickly dissolve into quite ragged arguments about eating particular kinds of food, and livestock products are a bit unpopular at the moment among some. And you can, that, as you've seen in other countries, can quickly become politicized. But what's the area that I'm seeing really picking up in this region? It's to do with reducing food waste. I mean, the problem about food waste is that essentially around 30% of the food that's available for eating is wasted. It's either wasted in the fields or in the fishing nets, or it's wasted in the kitchens, both of restaurants and of our own domestic use. That's really unsatisfactory. And to deal with this, you need a collaboration between business, local authorities, national governments, civil society, youth groups, and more. Because unless it's a whole of society approach, you can't do so. But I have heard examples in this meeting of countries all over this region who've worked out that the way to engage people in focusing on food and thinking about food as a system is to start stimulating real action on food waste, with governments encouraging targets to reduce food waste by, say, 20, 30, 40%. That includes food banking, which is a really good way of using food waste, given that we've got an awful lot of urban poverty. But it includes a lot of activities to just simply help people not waste so much. This is something you just really shout about. And it's built up in the last 2 years. And I think you've had something to do with it.
Absolutely. So now we can do a little bit of self-promotion now. Thank you, David. Yeah, indeed.
I didn't know until I was.
You didn't know, so we have to kind of do more shout-outs on our food loss and waste work, and I'm very happy to have Marit with us here as well. And maybe if we go down that strand a little bit, for us, the food loss and waste work came a little bit mandated because our member states decided to look at SDG 12 and circular economy. And I'm really happy that when we look at the origins of ETIN and the Transformative Innovation Network, it also had circular economy in the name. Yeah, so I really see this sort of like changing consumption and production, purposefully consumption first, production after, as behavioral change for me is a really intriguing factor. But maybe, Marit, if you want to say a few words about our food loss and waste work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elisabeth. Yes, in fact, it kind of started a little bit from the work of our groups. We have this working party on agricultural quality standards that sets standards on very specific products. It's quality standards for the marketing and commercial quality control. And this is a group of experts that comes together to discuss the standards. And as part of their work, it started in the fresh fruit and vegetables section, because we all know that fresh fruit and vegetables are one of the most liable to loss, but also one of the more healthy things that we need to eat. So one of the things that we need to reduce losses of. So they were saying, well, we have a group of experts here who know about this sector. So they decided to come together to develop a code of good practice to reduce food loss, basically providing guidance to the actors in the value chain of how you can do to handle the products so that they are less lost along the value chain, because they are very sensitive to how you handle them. If we all know, if you hit a banana, it will go bad rather quickly. So it's about how do you take care of the product with temperature, with handling practices, with packaging, to make sure that it lasts and all the way to the consumer and doesn't spoil before or even too quickly in the consumer's fridge. And we're now taking that further to develop similar guidance for dried produce. They spoil less, but dried fruits and nuts, basically. So similar there, bringing the experts that we have together. So I see what you're saying in the UN as a facilitator, as a stimulator in developing materials that others can use. And maybe last but not least, we have expanded on that work linking to circularity, and is looking at working with others to help some countries in this region, notably Serbia, to look at what they can do to reduce food loss and waste, and looking from a circularity angle, basically, in agri-food. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit. And I'm very happy we did it now, thinking about we needed to get the group a little bit out of the comfort zone, because these were really experts with a very focused approach. And then we as Secretariat tried to nudge them in the right direction. It was good that we had a mandate and a decision that we should be doing it, so we were backed up. But I would say for me, it was an attempt of transformation, and I'm very happy that you said we are in the right direction. And I was also yesterday thinking several counters mentioned it.
Yes, that's why
really
I got
surprised. Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
See, I love surprises. There was I. Boom, boom, boom. I knew about Denmark, but maybe some Danes on this call. When I heard it, I was just so excited. And Carlsberg had a huge role in that. Yeah. I mean, it's a public-private partnership. Your point about discomfort with everybody, systems work is uncomfortable. Systems work is frustrating. Systems work can sometimes make people feel they're under attack. Systems work makes you question whether you're any use, because it's not a single person changes stuff. Mm-hmm. We need to look after ourselves if we're doing systems work. That's one of the things that, if you're going to go further into this, I strongly encourage. Self-care is critically important.
Yeah, this is the point for the UN system as such as well.
And for UN as facilitator, I go further. UN as the stimulus of cascading facilitation. UN is tiny, but wouldn't it be great if each UN person could stimulate 100 people a year to become facilitators of these kinds of systems processes, like you're doing through the network?
I see Manuela smiling here. Another, yeah.
Exactly what we're trying to advocate for as well. So
put a big number.
A big number.
Yeah, shock people.
Okay.
You will do that with a smile, Manuela. Now, in yesterday's discussion, the other thing I realized many country statements was innovation.
Yes.
Yeah? So maybe if we just bring it back, our conversation to innovation, can be a little bit of technological innovation, or what do you see the role of innovation in the food systems transformation?
Innovation is essential for everything. I'm looking at the camera and I want to say it right and clear. Without innovation, stagnate. Humanity will get through multiple interacting and interlinked challenges through innovation. Using gadgets and gizmos to help us, artificial intelligence, super useful, digital connection, vital. Gosh, the wonderful opportunities from being connected as we are. And then the amazing capacity using laboratories to engineer by looking at ways of breeding and even ways of gene editing. Of course, there will be laws that will say you shouldn't do it in some countries. I'm not going to contest those, but I do see the capacity to edit genetic material, both for health and also for climate resilience, absolutely essential. So there's two areas of innovation. And then thirdly, as well as you've got the digital innovation and AI, as well as the genetic innovation and all linked to that, I want to talk about innovation in ways we work. Let's try to dismantle typical work sessions that are panels with 4 people talking about themselves usually or their organizations, and then it finishes. And then somebody who's given the unenviable task of making a thing out of it says, let's talk about it. And there's nobody who talks except perhaps a few advocates, and then you pack up and move on to the next thing, usually because time has run out. We shouldn't have those sorts of meetings anymore. We should have dialogues. And there are ways of structuring and running dialogues for lots of different purposes, for involving people who are normally not involved, for connecting people who don't normally connect, for looking at how implementation is going to get better coordination, and then innovating on monitoring and evaluations. Basically, dialogue-based processes, whatever they might be, that just enable people to connect and exchange are obviously the way to go. We've looked recently at land tenure arrangements in Africa, and we've found, looking back, that the way in which land disputes were resolved were not by having a panel of experts standing up and showing a PowerPoint saying this is the correct way to resolve land disputes according to this computer program or that algorithm. No, it's about enabling people to connect with each other with their hearts and their souls, as well as their minds, and respecting as they navigate and negotiate. Same in Afghanistan, the lawyer Jirga system. So dialogue is where we should be, because that's what's been used by humanity for centuries. And getting ourselves back to that is my passion. It's what I'd love your team to be focusing on, but most importantly, why I was so excited about coming to this transformative innovation network is that that's what you do. And so it's innovating on gadgets, it's innovating on biology, but it's innovating on ways of working. That's the most important of all.
Wow, David, silence. Because now you see Warren is nodding already, and then some of you know that.
I've been looking at Warren. Warren is there. He's got my eyes.
So we're going to hand over to colleagues on the screen now.
And Leonard, yes.
When in 18 we really tried to change the way we work, and that's hard for UNECE, yeah, because we are much more on the formalistic governmental side. And in 18 we tried to experiment along the way and loosely convene in different formats. But yeah, maybe Warren, Leonard, or Kaka, you give us your thoughts on that. Emanuela will help us, no?
Yes, I think Warren, please go ahead.
Thank you. And can I just say that's an incredibly motivating intervention that's been given so far. And I think it's really, pardon my pun, food for thought.
Good nice one.
But yeah, I mean, there's several things I'd like to just touch on, but I think, yeah, innovation in practice, as in the kind of working practices and the tools, the methods, the techniques that different parts of both government and private and social sectors use to come together. And I think your point around dialogue-based approaches is absolutely critical, because fundamentally it requires human beings to reach a consensus, to come to an agreement and take action in a decisive, deliberative way. So I think, yeah, anything that we can do to encourage and foster the confidence for anybody within an organization to kind of stick their head up and say, do you know what, I think we're doing something which probably could be done better, and could we try something different? And I think there's both the role of anybody in the organization to feel that they are empowered, but equally leaders within any organization, perhaps at the C-suites, all the chiefs representing their different areas, they have to create the enabling environments and that sense of trust and empowerment so that anybody does feel, okay, but actually, if I come forward with something that doesn't work, it's not a mistake because it's experimental, right? There's going to be no repercussions for trying something different. And I think that we have to almost reimagine failure in the context of experimentation, because the worst thing of all is not trying something different at all and always feeling that we're wedded to the ways of the past. And as you were talking, I was thinking, actually some of the very earliest experiments relate to food and, actually should I eat that red berry or that black one? Oh, actually, that one didn't have such a good outcome on that person. Let's not eat those berries. And that kind of oral tradition that passes from community to community is so vital to support experimentation and learning within advocacy networks, for want of a better word. So no, I think there's some really interesting pieces here as we think about, as you say, the complex and vast system of systems, one could say, that food and nutrition represents, and also the kind of links between food and social cohesion as well. So no, thank you. It's been fascinating so far, but I'll be keen to hear from others on the call as well.
Super. Huge thanks, Maren. And yeah, all 18 words I get here. Emanuele, do we have another?
Yes, Len, please go ahead. He's actually our lead expert on experimentation and strategic learning, so it's very fitting.
Hi, everybody. Thanks to all the speakers and to echo Warren. Really, really interesting, really engaging conversation. So thank you very much for that. Just on picking up on Elisabeth's point earlier on in terms of strategic learning, if you haven't seen it already, I've just popped in a link into the chat on the Etin Action Forum, the outcome or the output of that rather, which is a series of insight papers in various different aspects of transformative innovation. So there's a couple of pages in there on what we think strategic learning is about and how you might go about it, just for information. My comment, or my question rather, is that there's a really interesting aspect of this, I think, that we've touched on, that I want to dig into a little bit, particularly with David's experiences around synergies, trade-offs. But also we're touching on, so we've talked about facilitation and convening as a way to encourage the emergence of these synergies, which is great. But we're also starting to touch on an aspect of a more strategic aspect, I guess, of, okay, so, recognizing that people sit in silos, even when you convene them, it may be difficult to get progress. And David, I think you mentioned that in Norway, particularly, I think things are so tight that it is difficult to do that. So two questions, or maybe one question and one comment, I guess. Number one, what does it look like when you can identify a synergy? What are the signs that you're approaching it, and how can you recognize those signs, and how can you change behavior to encourage the emergence of that synergy? But secondly, and this comes from a topic that I've studied in the past, different types of tension. So looking at tensions from a point of view of being synergistic or being trade-offs is one aspect. That's fine, but there are other types of tension that you can solve. And I think, David, you've mentioned that example where you have situations where you can't actually solve this, and you have to live with it in some ways, which requires a different approach, which requires a paradox. Just a approach. So I'm wondering, as UNECE or whatever organizations are involved in this call are involved, when you think about tensions and emerging tensions and how you can deal with those, have you come across that just an approach to strategically managing attention? Thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I go? Yeah.
Big question.
What does it look like when you identify a synergy? In a way, there is, Leonard, something that you said that gave me a sense that you and I think the same. You talked about the emergence of synergy. You see, for me, as somebody who has really got into thinking about living systems and the particular properties of systems made up of people or animals or plants or microorganisms or mycelia or whatever, is that they have special characteristics that include the ability for things, new things to emerge, often in ways that can't be directly traced back to the original condition. I'm seeing more and more in some areas, like the IT space, some very rapid synergies emerging. And I see in food systems a little bit slower, often limited by growing cycles and so on. But the reality is that synergies are emerging all the time. Farmers basically look for synergies in the way in which they grow their stuff. That's how you run a farm, is based on the efficiency of synergy. And if you have trade-offs all the time in your farm, you're quite likely to end up going out of business, especially if the weather changes. Secondly, what does it look like when you feel a synergy is emerging? For me, it is just a very rapid shift in the way people do things occurs. And I mean, we have seen that a lot in the nutrition space in a number of communities. The shift away from a lot of sugar for children's foods has been something that's grown, at least amongst some of the bigger businesses recently, not all of them. And I've also seen synergy emerging a little bit on farming practices. Mostly it's at the interface with nutrition, the arrival of orange-fleshed sweet potatoes that contain lots of vitamin A. They've kind of taken over and dominated in a number of settings. So, I mean, I think much better work for synergy than spend your time hustling over trade-offs. As soon as you identify a trade-off, you are at risk of it being politicized, co-opted, captured, and then you're in trouble. I did a lot of work on COVID in 2020 to 2022, and I always said, let's please try to find synergies, because there are people waiting for us to find difficult trade-offs, and they just get off on it. Now, unsoluble tensions. Thank you for bringing up the reality that if you're working on systems, you also must be comfortable with the existence of paradox. Of course, if we look inside our own lives or the lives of our children, we quickly see that they are suffused in paradox, paradoxical feelings, what I call philoxes, and paradoxical actions. You have to live with it. Otherwise, you are going to end up being totally mashed by structures that you can't control. And the only way you can cope with being in situations where you have no control over the politics is to start saying, I am going to have paradox here. I'm going to have a personal dislike of some of these unpleasant political structures that are forcing us into boxes, but at the same time, I'm going to work with them, because otherwise I'm just finished. And for me, introducing paradox and polarity into systems working is really important. In our work, I'm just doing some stuff at Imperial College right now to introduce a short course in working with systems. In fact, we're calling it working with living systems. One of the things that we will introduce, but not until session 4 or 5, after we've gone through emergence, is the importance of being able to be comfortable with paradox. It really freaks a lot of people out when you get into that. Sorry, you're nodding. I hope that you're not finding this.
No, that's. I think you're right. I think we do think along the same lines with these things. So if I can be of any help in that, just give me a shout.
Then I'm going to find out where you are after this. Thank you.
Super, wonderful. This is almost bringing us to a natural close.
Check out this camera on.
If you okay, he just left. We lost him. We gotta reach out to him specifically. Yeah, and
it might be Georgian with that name.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, I have a little question that came out. Recently I came across a book,
Yes.
and there are both the real examples about, and one of them kind of stuck with me, and I was thinking, how could, for example, UN organizations help overcome this problem? So the example of the so-called golden rice, when the Swiss scientists invented the rice that would have components that would help to address the vitamin A deficiency, which in regions of Asia often provoke blindness in children. And they made a condition that it has to be accessible to poor regions of the world. They did not want the money out of this invention, but in the end of the day, the invention got stuck for over 2 decades, and it was not accessible because of the lawsuits between companies who were trying to benefit financially from this. And in the end of the day, I read that hopefully a few years ago, it kind of resolved with Bill Gates, donations and different organizations stepping in. But in the same time, over 2 decades, it was just hanging in the air and not accessible for people to benefit from it. And what do you think UN should do to maybe overcome in future this innovation that are happening those days, research and development, progress? How could we bring it to people?
Thank you very much indeed. Very quickly, go up to WHO and ask them to talk about the work that they're doing on trying to find ways to get intellectual property on medical inventions, including drugs, vaccines, and equipment, waived so that the materials can be accessible to people in poor countries without having to use the green boxes and the WTO rules that go for compulsory licensing if something is life-saving. But the alternative that WHO has been working on is not fully resolved. Medicines patent pool seems to be one way of doing this. Now, it's really important that there is much better coordination across UN agencies on this kind of issue, particularly on the specialized agencies. And I think that cooperation between FAO, WHO, WTO, and others could be very, very helpful in just dealing with these kinds of problems. I wrote down, I meant to say it earlier, some of these are moonshot problems. They need a different mindset to be able to resolve them. And that's where, just coming back to what Elisabeth was saying earlier, I would like to see a real effort to find the places where better coordination across the UN system would help with moonshots. And one of those is on the big challenge of intellectual property on things like vitamin A enriched rice. More to say. Let's not forget this conversation.
Super. So with this, I think we're going to close it. We will continue the conversation because we used to work on IP like 15 years ago, and now we work on innovation.
Okay.
Maybe, that's also been solved. Yeah. And David, huge thanks for taking time. This was so inspirational. And I'm just thinking, working for Synergies instead of wrestling with trade-offs, allowing for polarity and paradox, you sent us off into a beautiful weekend where our thoughts will go around this. And I'm really excited about continuing our work in the team on these issues. And also, I'm super happy to have the transformative innovation team because it actually might really help us solve some of the complexities. So huge thanks for being with us. Thank you, everybody who was on the screen. And with that, I also hand over to ultimately Emanuela. You will make it all look nice and presentable.
Exactly. We'll upload this on the appropriate channels in the days to come. So thank you also from our side very much for joining online, for the insightful questions. And I look forward to seeing you all soon.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David at 4SD, that's number 4SD.org. I'm one of the most contactable people on the internet. I'd love to be connected. Thank you very much.